All right. Hi, everybody. Today is Tuesday, August 8th on SIG Testing's weekly meeting. So today I just wanted to talk real briefly about owners files, and then I plan on handing off to Eric Veda to talk about a proposal he's got for getting the community to self-police flakiness. And I'll hand off to Sim St. Clair to talk about one of Peptio's new projects, Sonobuoy. So I will just share my screen real quick for the owners thing, but y'all are welcome to click the link in the meeting notes. Let's see here. I think that's the one. Nope, never mind, hang on. Oh, Arg. Look, I'll just put it this way, just to give some quick, no, hang on. All right, hopefully you're looking at a browser window. I can't tell anymore. So I spent a little bit of time last week going over what are owners files and how are they used in our pull request process. This isn't like super relevant to SIG testing, except, in fact, if anything, I tried to ignore all the testing bits of the workflow in describing how this works. The only little bit that is sort of related to SIG testing is while I was going through this, I noticed that there is some sort of history left over where some owners files have the words assignees in them. And so I've been going through to try and remove any usage of assignees, which sort of picked up this notion that there's some owners files in vendor directories. And that reminded me we have an issue open about like, what do we do with that? Do we want to alter the submit queue to ignore that? And I believe Steve and a couple other folks who've been working on Munch GitHub lately have run into that. But so this may not necessarily represent sort of the ideal for how this process can most effectively and efficiently be used, but I try to at least document sort of what the state of the world is, from the way the process works to some behaviors that seem a little quirky with it, and even trying to deep link into some of the actual test info related code that implements this. And I plan on updating this, like updating relevant community-facing documentation to tie back into this. This is all in the goal of trying to improve the health of our owners files. I think a lot of the problems we have are symptomatic of too few reviewers and not really effective policing of owners files. So today I sort of tripped and fell over the fact that there's a test that's failing in contrib that's blocking any contrib related PRs from being merged, because although it's super awesome we have the submit queue looking at contrib, the tests that are failing are owned by somebody who is no longer on the project. So sort of identifying these files and either removing them if nobody's going to pick up ownership, or campaigning for people to take ownership is something that it would be wonderful to automate, but in the meantime I'm just sort of trying to, as a human, take this stuff on. With that, I'll stop sharing. If anybody's interested in sort of hearing more about this work, I'm going to go ahead and sort of try and carry this forward under the contributor experience SIG, but I thought it might be relevant to this group since it touches Munch GitHub. And with that, Eric, are you ready to talk a little bit about your proposal?
Sure. So I emailed a proposal about, you know, there's a little bit of a thread, I think, last week about, you know, flaky tests. The flake rate is actually pretty high. I think it's something like 30% of commits experience flakiness, which is probably a floor because we don't necessarily retest every commit. So it's at least 30, you know, but basically, you know, people are having a bad time. And what I want to try and do is empower the community to do something about it without, and make it be that where they can do something for themselves. Rather than, I don't want our SIG to sort of become the, you know, enforcer or the build cop and sort of do everything, you know, sort of have the community assume that we will solve the problem for them, because we might not even, you know, we don't have good ideas. We don't have visibility into other SIGs and which SIGs are having problems. Because it could be that, you know, one SIG is totally happy with their flake rate, whereas another one is, you know, super unhappy. And so I would like these SIGs to talk to each other rather than just sort of have us, you know, decide on things. And so I wrote a doc that is sort of trying to, you know, encourage the community to do that and to put us more into a referee type position where we can, you know, see visibility onto those issues and I guess approve them. And yeah, the basic, mechanic is to encourage people to, if they are having problems with flakiness, to go check out our metrics, which should highlight which tests are problematic. And these days they should show which SIG is there. And then after that, sort of, you can change the SIG describe thing to sort of have flaky, which will take it out of the PR job that we validate passes before merging any code, and put it into the flaky suite, which runs after merging. So that should hopefully, still the test runs, and so the team that has that test and values that test can continue looking at it and hopefully deflake it, and then the rest of the community, doesn't have to be dragged down by that test. So that's kind of the proposal. I mostly, I wanted to bring it up in this SIG so that we could talk about it, so that it seemed more like a recommendation of our community, or, our SIG that we were giving to everybody else, as opposed to me just, arbitrarily sending an email. So I haven't actually received a whole lot of comments on the doc, and so I don't know if that's just everybody, more or less feels thumbs up, or if you haven't read it, or what's going on. But if anybody has any feedback here, I would love to hear it.
Well, speaking for myself anyway, I think it's a step in the right direction. You didn't see any comments from me because I haven't gotten around to it yet. Too many other squirrels, but I think it's super important. I'd like to be able for us to talk about this at the community meeting on Thursday and have a broader email sent out to Kubernetes dev. Looking at this from a release-facing perspective, my question is sort of what this implies for the frequency of these flaky tests. Like, how often are people going to get data points on whether or not these? So this feels less like fixing flaky tests, right, and more triaging them out of the critical path, which I think is, yes, empowering them. The question is then, are we just basically like shoving all this flaky stuff off to the side and nobody ever looks at that? So I don't actually think the flaky tests are part of the critical path for cutting a release. If I look at the test grid dashboard for release master blocking, there are some GCE slow and GKE slow jobs, but I am not sure if those, I think those avoid all of the flaky and disruptive tests. So it could be that what we're saying to a SIG is, by triaging the test out, you're effectively no longer guaranteeing that that functionality works for any future release of Kubernetes until you address that. Until you make that test work, or you rewrite it so it's not flaky or whatever. But I think, like, this phrase I've been using lately, right? Like, at least if we can start accurately describing the state of the world, and I think stamping a flaky on tests that are flaky would be helpful. And I think getting people to pay more attention to those, drawing more attention to those metrics would also be helpful. So I'm largely in favor of this. I personally intend to help drop some comments and maybe wordsmith a bit, but I really think having something to announce to a broader audience is a great idea. Because I've said in as many forums as I can that, like, we will defend to the death for you to run tests. We just won't write them for you.
Yeah, that's actually a good point about, I'm not sure if the slow suite only runs the slow tests or if it runs the entire suite. I should look into that. And, part of the, my expectation is that what I'm wanting, it to do is if SIG foo is unhappy with SIG bar's tests, I would like them to, make sure that SIG foo is communicating to SIG bar in one way, which is why I'm suggesting opening an issue, and second, have them be involved in the PR. So I would hope that, the only solution is not just to, have us immediately kick the job out of the parallel suite, but to sort of, I think it could actually just be that maybe the other team isn't aware that this is impacting people. So my hope is that, part of this is that it starts a discussion, and then SIG bar and SIG foo come to a discussion that, oh, SIG bar is going to work on this week and it'll get fixed. And so, we don't actually need to kick it out of the queue. Because, yeah, I would much rather, if we figure out, and maybe this proposal won't work at all, and we'll have to be back here in a month or in 1.9 coming up with a different idea. But I really want to, figure out some way to have us increase stability, not just ignore tests.
No, I fully agree. Being able to sort, like, we do have a dashboard. I personally have never put in front of the community that velodrome dashboard that sort of plots the consistency and flakiness stuff over time. I feel like maybe we could better display that data or make it look a little more like scary when flake rate's getting too high or consistency is dropping too low. And just the other thing to throw out there, I think I took an action item during SIG release that not all of the tests have the SIG name appended to them. And like, there was a lot of really great organic effort done during the recent fix-it, but there's still, like, I think ballpark 30% of the tests still don't have a SIG name attached to them. So I at least heard Phil Whitrock was going to try and chase some people down inside, and I'm going to try and at least come up with the list of tests that don't have SIGs yet and maybe see if we can call attention to that, because this is all predicated on having those SIG names inside of the test names. Like, again, it's a really silly lo-fi thing, but once you start seeing the SIG names in the metrics JSON file that calls out which are the flakiest tests, right, that almost looks really actionable and starts coming close to those carefully slow-roasted, handcrafted emails you were sending out a little while ago about, like, the worst offending jobs that SIGs could fix, that at least seem to get some attention. But I hope I'm not the only one talking, or at least I'm echoing the opinions of the group that I think this is the path forward.
Eric, I had one question that we noticed in Origin. It's always easier for a developer on a PR that hits a flaky test to hit retest and forget about it. And I'm wondering, like, so opening the issue, the added value of that on top of having automated like the dashboard saying, okay, this is the flakiest test, is, you were saying, putting like a human behind it and making it obvious to the SIG there are people being affected by it. Am I understanding that correctly? Because I guess just the issue process, I don't know, it's just easy to bypass it and hit retest and forget about it and hope somebody else does something about it. And I feel like, you know, when nobody feels like they need to do it, they just hope somebody else will.
I think that's a huge cultural challenge. Like, at one point we actually required, when you would say test this, you know, when you would say retest, you would have to link to an issue. But, you know, I guess there was an out, because, like, just like we're having issues with the approval, you know, how now you have to say that when you say /approve, it has to have an issue, and not everybody likes that. So, like, the regex would actually validate, you know, /retest #ignore. And so basically we just found that pretty much 100% of the retest commands were #ignore. And also we have automatically filed issues whenever there was a flake before, which we turned off, because that just created, you know, hundreds of issues that no one was actually looking at a day. And so right now, actually, Cole did some work where we're taking the top failure classes, and I think maybe the top 3 flakes or something. Like, each day we're looking at the top 3 failures and filing issues for those. And I'm not even really sure if those are getting a huge amount of traction. So yeah, I totally agree with you that, like, what we really need is for, you know, when there is a flake, for a human to start, like, acting on it. But sort of, you know, figuring out a way to do that isn't, like, super draining, is like, you are, you know, hey, you are now, your job is to now go harass the community to, like, go work on things, is not really what we want to do. And it's, like, not super fun. But yeah, it's a tough problem.
And I guess the other question I had too, I mean, we tried to implement a very similar thing, you know, before we were using Prow, link to an issue, and people found out, said, oh, you know, if we just delete the comments, then they won't know that they were a failed test. And I guess the other side too is what people have asked us for is, we'd love to have a list to say, like, as a developer, I want to invest in the test that's flaking the most. I want to make sure that the time I'm spending deflaking this is going to impact more people. And we tried to provide that, and I think to some extent it's successful, but I think you had actually a graph, or somebody posted a graph of, like, x-axis is how many number of tests ran, and then y-axis probability of that number of tests running and actually the overall result being successful. And it just plummeted, right? And I think at some point there's so many of these rarely flaking tests, but you're likely to hit at least one. And I guess the messaging struggle that we had then was no one test here is bringing down the ship, but they're all little leaks. And convincing people that even those are valuable, I'm not sure we found a good way to do that.
Yeah, well, if you figure something out, please share something that works. And there in our repo, there is, in test-infra/metrics, there's a bunch of, we try and highlight the things that are flaking the most. I think actually with PRs, like right now, it seems like the garbage collector tests and some of the stateful set tests are the most unhappy. And so I think that's why a lot of our batch merges are getting rejected. But even if we resolve that, it's not like going to be 100% success rate. There's going to be a large amount of those one-off things. And
and does that, because I saw those metrics and they look really, really great. Do we, like, as a testing infrastructure, is the end goal at least get the 80% and then forget the long tail because no one's going to take that effort? Are we happy just providing that information?
I don't know. I mean, do other people have, doesn't necessarily just need to be my opinion.
Sure. I mean,
do other people have thoughts?
I think there's sort of a broader messaging thing here where I agree the point you need to prove to people that even though like 80% consistency sounds like a high percentage, that actually implies that like almost nobody gets a PR through the first time, right? So I think we need to impress upon the community as a whole, but then you need to combine that with a call to action. And I think Eric's like just at least triage off the worst offenders thing combined with that link I posted in chat of like, these are, at least as of right now, the worst offending test cases, calls attention to, looks like I should go poke SIG apps, SIG API machinery, SIG storage, right? So, and I don't know if we were to do this on a weekly basis, would it actually make a difference over, 10 weeks, or are we just constantly chasing another 3 top bottlenecks? I don't know that for sure, but it does seem at least like an iterative step in the right direction. And I think you combine that with the fact that we are measuring consistency in flakes over time. This should hopefully be one of those cases where we can look at the data before, make the decision, look at the data after, and see if what we're doing is helping or not. Because that's a big one for me. Yeah, that's the dashboard. Like, I feel like I want to put that in front of people, but I still have a difficult time explaining to folks how that is actionable right now, which is why, as raw JSON as it is, it does actually include like flakiest test names. And just another point I wanted to put out there was that when people just like hammer retest, or when Beta's bot that automatically hits retest, I don't know if that's still deployed, like that at least provides us more data, right? Like more pull requests are having the tests run. And so if the pull request that flaked the first time now passes, we've identified, okay, well, that's an inconsistency in the tests, right? That's the exact data we need to be able to determine with more effectiveness which are the test cases worth paying attention to.
If I may respond to your point about having an iterative process over the next 10 weeks, I actually think that's a really great thing that you can measure. So you could just say, we're going to ping the top SIG or whatever. I think if you did that for even less than 10 weeks, a month, 3 weeks, like once you've established that pattern and that habit, you're going to see that you don't have to ping that SIG again very often, because they know that you're paying attention to it, and maybe they'll start paying attention to it.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, we're going to get feedback pretty quickly about whether or not we're at a sustainable flake rate when it comes time to do burn down and actually cut a release. I guarantee that. So our time for like some sort of actionable decision or useful metrics is like 3 or 4 weeks before code freeze comes up, and then 3 or 4 weeks before the release actually gets cut. So I was ballparking like, I guess it's more like 8 weeks. And yeah, let's add more crazy priority logic to the queue. I'm sure Eric loves that. But I think that is trollishly awesome.
We also, instead of linking people to these like JSON documents that aren't so clear, we can have that single number of like, your PR has a 60% chance of passing because of these flakes, and show that as one number, and maybe give the top failures.
Like anything that consumes this data and presents it in a more actionable manner or more like user-facing manner would be helpful. For me, at least, it's personally just that I don't have the bandwidth to do anything more than say this JSON is awesome, this data is pointing us in the right direction. But that sounds like a fantastic idea.
What sort of broadcasting do we have? I guess we have like the submit queue that most sometimes, and maybe the on-call page. I don't know where we would put the information where people would see it.
I love that number though. Your PR has an X% chance of passing because of these flakes. Like that is a perfect message, I think.
Yeah, that might actually be, a good, there's all these like help wanted issues, but we have those JSON objects, and if someone wants to create a HTML page that, pulls that data and presents it in a, nice, like shiny box, it says like, expect, you have a, whatever, 40% probability of experiencing a flake. Like, I don't know. I think that could potentially be really useful because I don't think
you can make a PR simulator where you click submit PR and it gives you an example of failure. So it wasn't like.
I think these all sound like really great ideas for someone else to do, but I don't hear anyone saying that they want to do it. But I like Aaron's suggestion of, I'm going to look at this. Maybe you're not. I'm not volunteering you, by the way. But I'm going to look at this. I'm going to ping the SIG over the next X weeks. They're the top contributor, and say, hey, will you take a look at this? And I think that just reaching out to people, individuals or SIGs directly over time is what is most likely in my mind to actually steer results.
The numbers were just so uninteresting. Yeah, I think we could do it. It would be pretty easy to do. I already wrote the on-call page that does something similar. I just don't know what people look at the most. We could put this in the submit queue. We could put this on the on-call. We could make it its own page. I
guarantee you, if it's something that's actually useful to people, it will spread like wildfire, and I will promote the shit out of it.
All right. I feel like that messaging of
four-letter word, but yeah, like if it's helpful, if it works, we can definitely assist with the messaging for sure. I don't want to spend too much time bike shedding to give Tim his chance to present, but just another thought to throw out there. I've seen a lot of people notice the bot commenting on their PRs. And we're basically reinventing IRC on PRs, but we could always do something like that.
I love the bot comments on the PR. That's why I'm in this, this is my first time here. Sorry if I'm talking too much. No, I want to adopt the bot. I want to expand it. I want to bring it to my workplace and use it. It's awesome.
Okay, Tim, do you have enough time to talk about Sonobuoy coherently?
I'll give a quick TLDR.
Sweet, go for it.
Right,
Eric, thanks a bunch. I would say for that, let's just, if there's, please look at Eric's doc. Let's comment there. Let's continue to discuss on Slack what we want to do about that, and we'll move forward. Okay, sorry, Tim, go for it.
Right, so recently we open sourced and announced a project Sonobuoy, and we did it as part of the CNCF conformance effort, but the scope is far beyond that for potential use cases. So Sonobuoy basically wraps the execution of end-to-end tests as well as pluggability and extensibility for data collection. So the idea is that Sonobuoy can plunk down on a cluster with a predefined configuration file, slurp up a bunch of data, and produce a single artifact. That artifact is just a tar.gz whose directory structure is well defined. The reason we wanted a single artifact is because the primary use case for this is after a person sets up a cluster, they want to know that the cluster is healthy or bad, right? So a person used tool XYZ, they stood up a cluster in the wild using, I don't know, sawdust and candy, whatever they did to make their cluster go, right? And the purpose of Sonobuoy is to plunk down and collect as much data and generate a report to determine whether or not the cluster executes the conformance test successfully, as well as collecting enough data to diagnose and to dive into the configuration and other details of the cluster. The Sonobuoy is very configurable. It can collect little to nothing, or it can collect as much as you want. This is all specified via configuration JSON file, so you can specify the resources that you want to collect. You can specify the location of where you want to output the results. Everything will get aggregated. You can apply filters to workloads, filters to namespaces. So if you want to select given areas of interest because you don't want to create a report, give it to the world, and then have it, have all your detailed information and secrets and whatnot. This is internal configuration for Sonobuoy. By default, it opens up an aggregation server. Internally inside of Sonobuoy is a master worker algorithm, or sort of execution model, where it basically spawns a bunch of workers that can go out to the different nodes and collect data on those individual nodes if you decide to use it that way. It's completely pluggable, so you can choose if you wanted to plug in with, say, something like SysTig, or if you wanted to plug in with your own data collection mechanisms. That's totally doable, and it'll just basically spam it into the report as further data that you can collect. So a use case of this actually originated from SIG Scale a long time ago, where we had wanted to have a systematic way of generating a report that says, I did this experiment, got these results with this configuration. And that's pretty much what Sonobuoy does, but the primary driver for us releasing at the CNCF conformance meeting was to have a unified way of giving a performance profile, and which can then be slurped in by another tool to allow you to do validation. So taking a quick gander, the directory structure and layout is something that we're actually going to PR on pretty soon. We have a current layout, which is there. So I just opened up into results. There's a whole bunch of information that's here, and it's basically ripping through all of the Kubernetes resources in a hierarchical structure, right? So if I go underneath resources, then there's the non-namespaced and the namespace scope resources. If you go underneath non-NS, these are the cluster bound resources, such as the nodes, persistent volumes, component stands, cluster roles. This is everything that's running on the cluster. You can also go into the individual namespaces. What you can see here is that there's a bunch of stuff running for different namespaces, and you can dive into the individual pods. The pod logs are there. I think the one thing that Sonobuoy provides is a unified way of collecting everything, right? That's pretty much it in a nutshell. I know we ran out of time. I got T-minus like 30 seconds here. So hopefully you'll find it useful. If other folks want to talk about it, other applications of it, I don't necessarily know whether or not it applies directly to the SIG, but it is highly useful for folks in the field as part of the post-deployment step. It's also super useful.
Yeah, I have a metric that I'm trying to invent.
Go ahead. Someone.
Oh, I'm sorry. I unmuted too early. I apologize. I was just going to say, fantastic work. I'm really excited by this project. We talked about something like this in SIG Cluster Ops months ago, but never did anything with it. And I very much look forward to using it. I have to drop off. I have another meeting, but fantastic work. I'm looking forward to running it on my clusters. Thank you.
One thing that we might want to promote eventually in the future is if you had a way to easily configure it, you could specify it as a way for debugging. I don't know how many issues folks have worked on where you've had partial information and you're playing doctor over a wall, but there's been a number of times where I've had issues filed where you don't have enough information. You're constantly going back and forth for you to get enough information to understand what is the actual bug that is being filed here. But that's pretty much everything I have to say. I know we're out of time now.
Okay, cool. I'm assuming if folks want to find out more, we can ask you on Slack in the SIG testing channel. Or...
Yep, and there actually is a Sonobuoy channel that Sarah let us create, so you can ask questions there. We're working with the conformance group to further define specifications too about what people want. And there will be issues opened with regards to the format, and we'll probably have PRs for that soon.
Cool. All right, thanks a bunch. I believe that's a wrap. Happy Tuesday, everybody.
See you next week.